Johnny Carson spent decades as the calm center of late-night television. Every night, millions tuned in expecting smooth jokes, music, easy laughs, and total control. But behind that polished surface were moments that went far beyond television charm. In this video, we look at the most intense confrontations tied to Carson's name, including the one that pushed everything closest to a breaking point. Join us as we step into moments that changed how people saw the king of late night, Joan Rivers. In the early years of her career, music, Joan Rivers relied heavily on Johnny Carson and The Tonight Show. At a time when few female comedians were given national exposure, Carson gave her repeated spots on his music show. Those appearances helped her build a name, grow her audience, and gain credibility in a tough industry. Over time, She Music became more than just a guest. Carson trusted her enough to let her guest host, something very few performers were music allowed to do. Because of that visibility and trust, many people in television began to see Rivers as a natural choice to eventually music replace Carson. She wasn't just another comedian anymore. She was closely tied to his brand. Everything changed in 1986. Rivers was offered her own show on a new network, The Late Show, starring Joan Rivers. It was a major step forward in music, and she would become the first woman to host a late-night talk show on a major network. But the way it unfolded caused problems. Music. The deal came together quickly, and she was told the news would leak soon. Instead of calling Carson directly, she chose to stay silent music until the announcement became public. From her side, it was a rushed decision under pressure. From Carson's side, it felt like betrayal. After the news broke, music, Rivers tried to call Carson to explain. The conversation didn't last long. Music, Carson reportedly cut her off and hung up before she could finish. That moment ended their relationship instantly. There was no follow-up. Music, no attempt to talk things through. A connection built over decades disappeared in a matter of seconds. The consequences were long-lasting. Rivers was no longer welcome on The Tonight Show. That absence lasted 26 years. Even after Carson retired, the distant music remained. In the entertainment world, Carson held a lot of influence, and music, his silence carried weight. While there was no official ban announced, the message was clear. Rivers' career continued, but the loss of that platform changed her path significantly. Years later, Rivers spoke openly about how deeply this affected her. She described Carson as a mentor music, and even a father figure, which made the rejection personal, not just professional. She never fully got over it. Carson, on the other hand, rarely addressed the situation. He kept his distance music and never showed interest in repairing the relationship. And this wasn't the only time Carson's private feelings turned into public fallout. Don Rickles. The moment started with something small but meaningful. On the desk of Johnny Carson sat a wooden music cigarette box he used regularly during The Tonight Show. It wasn't just a prop. It was part of his routine. Something familiar that added to his on-screen presence. During a night when Don Rickles' music was guest hosting, he handled the box and accidentally broke the lid. Rickles didn't mean to damage it. He treated it casually, the way he treated most things, with humor and little concern. But for Carson, it mattered. When he returned and saw the damage, he wanted to know music, exactly what happened. Once he learned Rickles was responsible, he didn't brush it off. He saw an opportunity to respond music in a very public way. Instead of confronting Rickles privately, Carson chose a different route. At the time, Rickles was filming his sitcom CPO Sharkey on a nearby set. Carson waited for the right moment, then walked straight onto that set while filming music was in progress. Cameras were rolling, and the audience had no idea what was about to happen. Carson entered, holding the broken box, calm, but clearly focused. This wasn't random. The timing showed intent. He wanted the confrontation to be seen, not hidden. Music. By stepping into Rickles' space, he turned a simple mistake into a live moment of tension. Music. When Carson appeared, Rickles was caught off guard. His reaction was immediate. He looked confused, then music, nervous, and then tried to recover by making jokes. The audience didn't know if this was planned or real. At first, there was hesitation. Music. People weren't sure how to react. Then Carson spoke directly to Rickles, asking about the broken box in a serious tone. The tension built quickly, but it didn't stay uncomfortable for music long. Rickles began to respond in his usual style, joking and trying to lighten the situation. Music. As the exchange continued, the audience shifted from confusion to laughter. What started as a surprise turned music into a moment of live entertainment that felt unpredictable and real. Even though the scene was funny, there was something deeper happening. Carson was making a point. By confronting Rickles in front of a live audience music on his own set, he showed who was in control. He didn't raise his voice or lose his temper, but his presence alone carried weight. Rickles, who was known for putting others on the spot, was now the one being challenged. The humor made it easier to accept, but the message was clear. Carson set the boundaries, and no one crossed them without consequence. At the same time, the moment stayed music, just within the limits of entertainment. It didn't turn into a real argument, but it came close enough to feel music intense. That balance is what made it unforgettable. But not every confrontation stayed this music-controlled. One would come much closer to turning into something real. Wayne "Music" Newton. For years, Johnny Carson used his monologue to take shots at Wayne Newton. At "Music," first, it sounded like the usual late-night teasing, but the tone started to change. Carson's jokes didn't just poke fun at Newton's career. Music. They questioned his masculinity and hinted at connections to organized crime. These weren't light remarks anymore. They felt music, personal and damaging. Each joke added pressure. Newton stayed quiet for a while, but the repeated comments built frustration. What the audience heard as humor, Newton experienced as music, public disrespect. Instead of responding to the media, Newton chose a direct approach. He went to NBC Studios Music and asked to see Carson face-to-face. This wasn't planned for cameras. There was no audience, no script, and no intention to entertain. When Newton entered Carson's music office, the tone was serious from the start. He wasn't there to joke or laugh anything off. He wanted the comments to stop music, and he made that clear immediately. Carson, who was used to controlling conversations on his show, was now in a very different situation. During the confrontation, Newton reportedly told Carson to stop mentioning him entirely. The message was direct and firm. There was no humor in his words. According to several accounts, music, the tension in the room rose quickly. Voices were raised, and the situation came close to turning physical. This wasn't a playful exchange like Carson had with other comedians. Music, it felt like a real threat. Newton made it clear there would be consequences if the jokes continued. For Carson, this was music, unfamiliar territory. Most people accepted or ignored his jokes. Newton challenged him directly without hesitation. The result was immediate. Carson stopped using Newton's name in his monologues. There was no gradual change. Music. The jokes ended almost overnight. For someone known for pushing boundaries and standing by his material, this was unusual. Carson rarely backed down once he started targeting someone. In this case, he did. That quick shift showed how seriously he took the confrontation. Newton didn't go public with the incident or tried music, turn it into a media story. He got the result he wanted and moved on. What made this moment stand out was the setting. There was no audience to soften the tension or turn it into entertainment. Their music were no cameras to shape the interaction. It was direct and personal. Without that layer of performance, music, the situation felt more real and more unpredictable. This wasn't about getting laughs or winning over viewers. It was music about setting a boundary and enforcing it. That's why it came closer to actual violence than any other conflict tied to Carson. Not every conflict ended music with raised voices, though one of them played out quietly, but left a lasting mark. Raymond Burr. Raymond Burr was a respected actor known for strong, serious roles. But on The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson often turned in music into the subject of jokes about his weight. These comments came up again and again in monologues. Music, at first, they may have sounded like typical late-night humor, but the repetition made them feel targeted. The audience laughed, but Burr was being singled out for something personal. Music. Over time, the jokes shifted from light teasing to public embarrassment. Burr didn't react publicly. Instead, he tried to handle the situation quietly. People close to him said he reached out behind music, the scenes, and asked the jokes to stop or at least slow down. He wasn't asking for attention or making a scene. He simply wanted respect. But nothing changed. The jokes continued, which made it seem like his concerns weren't being taken seriously. Whether the message didn't reach Carson or was dismissed, music. The result was the same. Burr felt ignored. When Burr returned to the show for what would become his final appearance, everything looked normal on the surface. He was polite, professional, and calm during the interview. There was no sign of tension for music. The viewers watching at home. He answered questions, played along, and kept the mood steady